If you want to build a web app without writing any code, in this video we use Cursor's Composer agent to create your first app, save your code to GitHub, and deploy your app using Vercel. In other words, by the end of this video, you'll have a real working web application live on the internet, zero coding experience required. Let's do this. Hey everyone, I'm Jeremy and I'm a full stack software engineer. This is the first video in my Cursor AI development series, so if you want to learn more about Cursor or AI powered development in general, be sure to subscribe to the channel. In these videos, I'm assuming that you have no knowledge of coding or software development. My goal is to not only show you how to do things, but also educate you on software development concepts so that you can be better and more efficient with AI coding tools. So, what is Cursor in the first place? Cursor is an AI powered code editor or IDE, which stands for Integrated Development Environment. An IDE is basically a workspace for building apps, where you can write code, manage your files, and debug, run, and test your project. In traditional IDEs, aside from auto-completion and some basic code generation, you have to write all the code. With Cursor, its AI agent writes the code for you. What a time to be alive. Now that you know what Cursor is, let's get into the installation. All right, everybody, so let's get into the installation of Cursor. Here we are in cursor.com. I do suggest you sign up for a free account. But before we do that, let's just look over the pricing real quick. So let's just click on pricing up here. So over here in the pricing page, you have 3 different tiers. Sign up for the hobby tier, which is free. In it, you get access to the pro tier for 2 weeks. You get 2,000 completions and 50 slow premium requests. Now you might be wondering, what's the difference between a fast request and a slow request? So a fast request is pretty much when you send a message to Cursor, it gives you a response pretty much instantly. In a slow request, when you send a message to Cursor AI, there's a bit of a delay, in my experience, about 5 to 10 seconds before you get a reply. So that's something worth noting. I pay for the pro version and I've actually used up all of my fast premium requests for the month, and I'm on my slow requests, and honestly, it's not that bad, the delay between sending a message and getting a slow response back. You get used to it. But for you, when just starting out, definitely sign up for the free version. Back here in the Cursor homepage, if you click on sign in, if you do have an account, you can sign in right here, or if you do not, click on sign up down here, and then you can go through the process of creating an account. So after signing up for Cursor, you should be led to the settings page right here. I just want you to note that you have 14 days remaining of the pro trial. Over here, you have 150 fast requests for premium models. The Claude 3.5 Sonnet LLM is the default LLM included with Cursor, and that's what we'll be using today. Okay, so to download Cursor, let's click on the download button in the top right corner. Here's a download file. I'm going to double click that. I'm on a Mac, so if you're Windows, it might look a little different. Double click on Install Cursor. Yes, I want to open it. So it is now downloading the latest version of Cursor, which is 0.44. Okay, looks like it's done. I'll need to manually move Cursor to the applications folder, which we'll do that right here. So let us double click on Cursor. And looks like we have our Cursor. So after you open Cursor for the first time, you're going to be presented with this window right here. You can leave all the settings default. Of course, if you want to choose a language, you can do so right here. But I'm just going to go ahead and click continue. Then you choose your data preferences. I'm going to click privacy mode and continue. Then you can log in using the account you just created. Okay, so once you've entered your credentials, you should now see your blank Cursor IDE. If you look in the top right corner over here, you should see a few icons. The first icon, if you hover over it, it says toggle primary sidebar. If you click on that, you get the main sidebar over here. So if your no folder open section is not expanded, go ahead and expand that section. Now, the first thing that we need to do is to create a folder that will store all of the code and files for our project. So click on open folder. I like to create a Cursor projects folder. This folder is going to hold all of the projects that I create within Cursor. So I'm going to create a new folder over here. So let's call our project for today, My First React App. Click create. So now we are in the My First Create React App folder. Let's click on open. Okay, so as you can see over here, our project is called My First Create React App. Once we add some code and files, you can see all of it within this sidebar over here. Now to the good stuff. If you go back to the icons in the upper right corner, hover over the toggle AI pane and click it. So this AI pane is where the magic happens. This is where you can interact with your AI agent and create, develop, and build your entire application. So just a quick tour over here. We have composer mode, which you can see, and we have the chat mode. So chat mode is best used for small code changes or small code fixes. You can think of chat mode as your coding buddy or your coding friend. In Composer, you have 2 different modes. You have the normal mode and you have the agent mode. Composer Normal is better than chat at making bigger changes across your entire code base. You can think of Composer Normal as a general knowledge expert in coding or in your application. Now, Composer Agent is your specialized subject matter expert consultant. Without any context, the agent can search your code base for files, issues, and architect the best way to go about doing things. Composer Agent, in other words, has more autonomy than Chat or Composer Normal. So if you don't know how to code, Agent is where you should be most, if not all of the time. These days, I personally am always using Composer Agent. Sometimes if it hangs or gets stuck, which it does, sometimes it'll get stuck generating some code. At that point, I'll switch over to Composer Normal, knock out some code over there, and then try to get back to Composer Agent as soon as possible. I'm just a lot quicker with using Composer Agent. So within the chat, you can click on Add Context to add any kind of files or documentation within your code base to the chat. And you can also do that by just typing @ and as you can see, by typing @ you can then reference any file or any folder or any documentation within your code base. You also can upload an image over here if you wanted to provide an image of a mockup or of a website in which you want to draw design inspiration. That is super helpful. And of course, over here, you can select between different LLMs in which you want Cursor to use. As mentioned in the beginning, Claude 3.5 Sonnet is the default LLM. It is one of the best LLMs for coding today. If you want to start a new chat or a new composer, you just click on the plus button over here. Sometimes if the sessions get way too long, the AI starts to trip up and lose context of what's going on, or worse, just hang and get stuck. So after you finish a new feature or after you commit your code to GitHub, always start a new composer session. If you want to go back into your composer or chat history, you can click on this icon over here. I do want to point out one more thing. If you click on this icon over here to open the cursor settings. So this is the cursor settings window. For our purposes today, we're not going to change anything over here. I did want to point out rules for AI over here. So these are rules that you can provide such that when the AI replies to you, it'll take into consideration, take into context the rules that you have here before providing you a reply. So if you have over here, for example, output your answers in Portuguese, it'll give you your answers in Portuguese. We'll get more into how to use rules for AI and a cursor rules file as well in probably our next video, so stay tuned for that. But for now, we don't need to mess with our cursor settings, just letting you know that these options are there. All right, so before creating our first project, we need to get our computer set up with some developer tools. So we need Node.js, which helps us develop React apps on our computer, and Git, which helps us save and track our code changes. So there are a couple ways to install these tools, but luckily we can just ask the agent to install it for us. So I do have a template ready for us today. I'm just going to get it over here under templates, first React project, and drag it onto the canvas. By the way, this is a tool that I've been working on. It kind of helps me to write and organize my prompts in a more visual manner. So in our first prompt, we're going to say, I want to create my first React app, but I'm new to coding. Can you help me install Node.js and Git? Which remember are the two tools that we need to start developing React applications. I'm including my operating system over here and then saying, give me a concise and easy to understand explanation of each step and why we're doing it. I included this line over here just so that we can actually learn what's going on. If you are on Windows, I apologize, we can't go through your setup today, but simply just replace macOS with Windows and use the agent to help you and walk you step by step through setting up the dev tools on your operating system. Remember, if you get stuck or something goes wrong, just type into the chat, provide the error or a screenshot of what's going on and say, hey, I'm stuck, what do I do now? And the agent should be able to walk you through step by step on how to get everything set up. All right, so I'm going to go in the top right corner over here and click copy block. Block copied to clipboard. We are back in cursor and I'm going to paste our prompt right over here. Again, make sure you are in the agent mode, and once you have verified that, then we can click submit. Okay, so the first thing that it's going to do is check if Node and Git are installed. Click on run command. So clicking on run command actually lets the agent to run the command in your computer's terminal. So of course, neither Node nor Git is installed, and we need to install those tools using Homebrew, which is a package manager. So right now it's going to check if we have Homebrew installed, which we do not. So now it's saying over here at the bottom, we need to install it, which if we run this command, our agent is now going to install Homebrew. For me, I have to type in my password, which you may or may not have to do this. So enter. All right, so it took a couple of tries, but I finally entered my password correctly. Now it's saying to press enter. Now I just have to press enter, and it is now installing Homebrew. So after running the Homebrew installation command, you should see this message, downloading command line tools for Xcode. Now the terminal messages should stop here. Now if you're on Mac, you should have seen a pop-up at some point saying the git command requires the command line developer tools. Would you like to install the tools now? So the terminal actually will not proceed unless you click on install in this dialog. So once you see this message, downloading command line tools for Xcode, click install, click agree, and now it is downloading command line tools for Xcode. So it says 40 hours, 30 minutes remaining. It's not going to take that long, so don't worry. Okay, so the command line developer tools is taking quite a long time to install. I wanted to ask kind of what's the average amount of time it should take, just so you can get an idea of how long you should be waiting. Claude says on a fresh installation of command line tools, typical time ranges are 10 to 20 minutes on a good connection, average connection about 20 to 30 minutes, which is what I've experienced so far. And on slower connections, it can take up to 45 to 60 minutes. This takes a long time, and this also assumes that you're installing it via Homebrew on the terminal or command line. It takes a long time because the download is about 1.2 to 2 gigs, and after downloading, it needs to unpack and install everything. So just a heads up again, the command line tools can take a long time to set up. Okay, so finally we have a message that the software was installed. Let's click done. Back over here in Cursor, it looks like I need to enter my password again. Downloading and installing Homebrew. Okay, so it looks like I got connection failed. Sometimes this happens with the agent, so just hang in there. Don't click try again, click on resume, because if you click try again, it's going to try to do a bunch of other things starting way at the top, whereas resume will just resume what it's currently trying to do. So it looks like the Homebrew installation has completed, and now we have to add it to our path. So let's just click run command. Okay, so that took a long time to install Homebrew and the developer tools, but just keep in mind those are one-time setup things. As you can see right now, we're going to use Homebrew to install Node and Git, and just watch, it's not going to take as long as installing Homebrew. It should be fairly quick. So it's been at least 5 minutes, maybe just under 10 minutes since I started the brew install node git command. Just heads up again, this is not going to take 1 or 2 minutes. Depending on how fast your computer is, it probably will take around 5 minutes or at least 5 to 10 minutes. All right, so the node and git installation looks to have finished. Now it's saying let's verify that everything has been installed correctly. So this command is just checking the version on node and the version on git. And if we run it and it replies with the version of both of those, which it does. See the Git version is 239 and Node is 23.6. Now we have installed Git and Node. All right, so just to recap, we installed our package manager Homebrew. We installed Node.js, which helps us to develop React applications. And we installed Git, which is our version control or source control system, which will help us to save and track any changes to our code. All right, so now we've completed the Cursor installation. Now we can get to the fun stuff. Now we can create our first React application. Okay, everybody, so this is the moment you've all been waiting for. Let's talk about the application that we're going to build today. It's pretty simple, and it's going to be a tip calculator. So here in the US, the tipping culture is pretty aggressive, might I say. I know in other parts of the world, tipping isn't as common, or it pretty much doesn't exist at all. I'm referring to the tipping in restaurants and bars. So say at the end of your meal or at the end of your stay at the bar, you ask for the check, you are often given a check, and at the bottom there's a little field for you to enter a tip. And of course your bill plus the tip is the final amount that you have to pay. Common tip percentages that I've seen here are 15, 18, 20, 22, and 25%. Our tip calculator is going to be for those scenarios where you have to calculate the tip yourself. Maybe you're not good at mental math, or maybe you're not good at doing percentages. So our tip calculator is going to help those folks who maybe are in a rush, maybe are trying to get out there quickly, or trying to hide the fact that they're using their phone to calculate the tip, because I know some people can do it like mentally really quickly. It should be quicker to use than your phone's calculator. That's the value proposition. So let us get into designing some of the requirements, and to help us do that, I'm going to pull up again my little tool over here. If I go to documentation, I'm going to drag a project overview block onto our canvas. So if you've seen some of my videos before, I always use this project overview to kind of plan ahead. If you're using tools like lovable.dev or bolt.new to create applications, filling out this project overview is a great way to organize your thoughts. It's a great way to plan ahead your product requirements, your technical requirements, and it's a great way to save tokens, because by giving all this information up front, it reduces some back and forth messages that you're going to use eventually later. You might often hear about a PRD or product requirements document. I believe PRDs are traditionally more product focused, where you go more into the user journey, the user requirements, and it's not really tech focused. Tech focused documents are TRDs, or technical resource documents. So my project overview is kind of a hybrid between a PRD and a TRD, which is why I hesitated to call this a PRD. And the beauty about this is you can add as much as you want to, or as little as you want to. If you want to go deep into the user journey, you can do that over here or over here. If you want to give a lot of technical details, you can do that in tech stack. And if you want to provide a lot of details about design, you can do that over here. Same with performance and code quality. So that is my project overview framework, or template rather, in a nutshell. All right, so let's start filling out our prompt. So I have a button up here to add a prefix message before getting into the details. This is the default message over here. Please help me to create a web app. I've attached a mockup and included a project overview below. So we are going to alter the message very slightly and say, please help me to create a web app in the current directory. I'm basically saying this to be explicit, to insert the project files within the current directory that we're already in. In the second sentence, I'm saying you are a UI UX expert in beautiful calculator design for web apps. So I remove the line about attaching a mockup because we're not going to attach a mockup. We are going to trust in Cursor and trust in our project overview. So for our app name and purpose, we are going to call this Just Tip It, a simple, easy to use tip calculator for those in a rush. For our ICP, it's going to include those who need to calculate tip quickly with no assistance, and maybe those who are bad at mental math, particularly calculating percentages. As for our main features, we're going to have a bill amount input field, a tip percentage input field, and then we're going to have a calculated tip amount display. Of course, we're going to need a number pad for easy input and real-time calculations. For our user flow, the user is going to input a bill amount. The user is going to input a tip percentage. The tip amount is going to be automatically calculated and displayed along with the final bill amount plus tip amount, which is going to be automatically calculated and displayed as well. For our tech stack, we are going to be using React with TypeScript along with Vite, which is a dev build tool that makes your app load and update instantly during development. Moving on to design, so our app must be responsive, optimized for mobile usage, big buttons that are easy to tap, clear large text that's easy to read, simple without any clutter. It needs to work smoothly without hitting enter, made for one-handed use just in case you're in some tight situations, and we shouldn't have to scroll to view any of the UI elements. As for performance, the only thing that matters here is for the calculations to happen immediately. And lastly, for code quality, I usually just paste these two same points in all of my simple web apps, pretty much saying follow the best practices for modern web development and write clean and maintainable code so that in the future, if we want to expand on this application, we won't be coming back to a hot mess of spaghetti code. All right, so this prompt is looking pretty good. All I have to do now is just click copy this block. Back over here in Cursor, I'm just going to paste. And as you can see, I have the prefix message over here and our entire project overview. So make sure that agent mode is on, which I've just selected over here, and let's click submit. Okay, so the first thing that's happening over here is Cursor is prompting us to run this terminal command. So this command is going to create a Vite project within our current directory. Whenever Cursor wants you to take action, you'll notice that whatever it wants you to take action upon, it is going to be highlighted in light green like you see over here. Sometimes Cursor is going to prompt you to run a terminal command like over here, or like you'll see in just a few seconds, it's going to have you to either accept or reject some code changes. So let's go ahead and click run command. So after running that command, as you can see over here in the sidebar, our project files are starting to get generated. Now it needs us to install some necessary dependencies. So let's go ahead and click run command. Okay, so Cursor installed the dependencies and now it's going through each of the files and making some changes to implement our requirements for the calculator. So as you can see, we have a few different boxes highlighted in green. So these are all the files that Cursor is proposing changes to. So you can technically go into each of these and hit accept or reject for each of these files and do that manually. Although I do not recommend doing that, especially if you're not technical or haven't developed before. I recommend scrolling all the way down, and once Cursor is finished proposing all of its changes, you can either accept all or reject all. So right now we're going to click accept all. Now as you can see, all of those green boxes have been removed. And the next thing that Cursor is telling us to do is to run this command npm run dev. So npm run dev is the command to start our development server, which starting your development server basically means Cursor is going to run your application and give you a URL to view it and use it in your browser. Now this is personal preference, but I do not recommend running the npm run dev command here within the AI pane or within a composer chat, and I'll tell you why. So let's just go ahead and click cancel over here. If you go into the right hand corner, hover over this icon, it says toggle panel, click that, and now we have a dedicated separate view for our terminal. So here's why I recommend you type npm run dev command over here. So the reason why I don't like to run it in the composer chat is because there are so many changes happening in the chat. You're going back and forth with messages. This command can get lost within all of that. Over here in the dedicated terminal, you can do npm run dev, click enter, and as you can see, our app is now running. And while our app is running, you're going to be making changes. You're actually going to see your changes and some logs update here in the terminal window. Sometimes if there's errors, you're going to see errors within this terminal window as well. So you wouldn't be able to see that at least clearly if you ran npm run dev inside of your composer. So that's why I recommend running npm run dev in the terminal. So to view our application, you can actually copy this or command click. All right, so here's our calculator, just tip it. I'm digging the very simple bare bones UI so far. We can enter something like 75, click on the tip percentage to 20%. All right, looking good. We have a clear button, which clears this field that's selected. If I select this field, we can clear that as well. Super simple, pretty much has all the functionality. Let's see the responsiveness. If I shrink the screen over here, still looks good. To also test if this works on mobile, you can do Command Option I to pull up the dev tools. And over here, if this icon is not selected, it says toggle device toolbar. This icon helps you test different mobile dimensions. So if you click that, let's go to iPhone SE for starters. And as you can see, I don't need to scroll to view anything, which is good. iPhone SE is probably the smallest dimension that we have here. If I go up to iPhone 12 Pro, you can see that the calculator still looks great. So works great on mobile and on the web. Responsiveness looks good. All right, so I'm pretty happy with the functionality and how our calculator looks. Of course, we can always get into making it look better, giving it more colors or more style, but that's not the point of this video. We actually now are going to upload our project to GitHub and deploy it to Vercel. So let's get into that. So here we are on github.com right now. So why do we upload our code to GitHub in the first place? So at a very high level, GitHub is a place for developers to save and share their code. Right now, all of the code that we have in Cursor, this is all on our local computer. So how are you going to share this code if you want somebody else to work on it or somebody else to review it? Instead of just zipping up all these files and emailing it or placing it into a Google Drive, we can instead just upload all the code to GitHub in a GitHub project and then just share a link to that project if we want others to access it. So after you've signed up for GitHub, it's completely free. If you notice in the top right hand corner, a few icons down from your profile, you're going to see this create new button. Click on that and then click new repository. So now we have to fill out some information for our new repository. So it's a good practice to name your repository name the exact same name as your Cursor project. So our Cursor project was called My First React App. My First React App is available. You can write an optional description, just tip it, a simple tip calculator. And then over here, you can set your repository to be public or private. If it's public, of course, anybody can see the repository. I'm going to mark ours private. You can add a README file or a git ignore. I would suggest just not checking those off. You can always ask Cursor to add those files later. All right, so that all looks good. Let's click Create Repository. So now this is the home page for your React project. As you can see up here, we're in the Code tab, which we don't have any code just yet. I want to point out Settings over here. If you go to Settings, scroll all the way down. If you want to change the visibility of your repository, you can do that here. Scroll back up to the top, click on Code. So what we need to do right now is to tell Cursor to push all of our code to this GitHub project. And what we're going to need is the link to the project, which is right here. So let's go ahead and click copy. So to create our Cursor prompt, I'm going to go to source control over here, drag a source control block. And after source control, we're almost there, guys. We're going to do a deployment. We are actually going to use Vercel. So please help me to deploy this app to Vercel. So if you've never deployed before, you can always ask Cursor, of course, to walk you through the steps, but deploying to Vercel is so easy. I'm just going to walk you through that process. We're not even going to use this prompt. I just wanted to show you, if we zoom out a little bit, that this was our prompt flow today. We started by installing Node.js and Git to make sure our environment is ready to develop React apps. Then we created a project overview, which was used to create our application. Now we are doing source control to upload our project. So for source control, what we're going to say is, please help me to push my code to GitHub. I've installed Git locally, and I have also created a project in GitHub. Here's my GitHub projects link, which we had copied earlier from when we set up our GitHub project. And then I'm saying, walk me step by step through this process. Let's start by setting up my Git identity. So if you've never pushed a Git before, you're going to need to set up your Git identity, which is basically your username and email that are attached to each commit you make. So when you're looking at pushed commits on GitHub, your name is going to be next to your commit. This is really helpful if you're on a team with a bunch of developers, or even if you're working on a project with one other person. You can know exactly who made certain commits, or better yet, know who to blame if the application is broken. Okay, so this prompt looks good. We're going to copy the block. So we are back here in Cursor now, and we are going to paste our prompt here in the chat box. Again, make sure you have the agent mode selected, and let's click submit. And if you're not already there, click on this icon over here to bring up the source control section on the sidebar. So the first thing that Git's doing is setting up our Git identity. As far as username and email, I just use my GitHub username and my GitHub email. But you can use whatever you choose to. All right, so if you're wondering, Cursor is prompting me with the blue box over here to take action and run this command. Notice that it's blue instead of green. That's because I'm going back and re-recording this section. I'd forgotten to do the Git identity setup and the authorization process because I'd already been connected to GitHub from my local environment. So in that time between when I originally recorded this and today, I had updated my Cursor IDE. We started the video with Cursor 0.44, I believe, and now we are on Cursor 0.45. So if you're wondering why there's a blue box over here instead of a green box, it's because I upgraded my Cursor IDE. Okay, so let's click run command. All right, let's set up my email, run command as well. Now it's going to verify my Git configuration. You can see I have my username, my email. So interesting, I have two different credential helpers. So the OSX keychain credential helper is installed by default when we install Git. So because we went through the process of installing Git together, I believe you should see this credential helper over here. Let me know in the comments if you do or you do not. So what this does is basically use the macOS keychain application to help manage our Git credentials. We do not need this credential helper here, and I think this is just from some old Git stuff that I had done a while ago. So I'm just going to delete that real quick. So I'm going to go to terminal over here. I'm going to run a command to unset this credential helper. All right. And I'm just going to run this command to verify that I did. Okay. So now we only have OSX keychain, which is what we need as our credential helper, and our username and email is correct as well. Again, you didn't have to do what I just did. I just did that because we don't need this. And I think I had included that a while ago with some other Git installation I was trying to do. So I'm just going to do clear here. So now with git init, we need to initialize our local repository. So as you can see, after we ran git init, all of our files came over here under the source control section. So over here in terminal, I just clicked enter 4 times, click enter one more time. Now you can see that Git created a master branch. So master is the traditional name for your main branch or your initial default branch. Git is now changing the name master to main because that is their standard. So let us click run command. Okay. So I think Cursor has a typo over here. It's saying, let's rename the default branch to main, where we're going to run git add period. So what git add period does is add all of our changes over here to the staging area, where the staging area is an area where all of our code changes are in preparation to be committed to our local Git repo. So let's click this command. So I don't know if you noticed, but before we did git add period, all of these files had a U next to them. U means untracked or unstaged. Now they have an A next to them, which means they have been added to the staging area. Okay, so now we're going to do our initial commit to our local Git repository. Not sure if I mentioned it already in the video, but in order to get our code from our local computer into the cloud onto GitHub, we need to do two things. The first is the git commit. The git commit saves our changes to our local computer in our local Git repository. And then we need to do a git push to push our changes from our local repository into our remote repository in GitHub. Let's run the git commit command. And as you can see, all of our staged changes are no longer here because they have now been saved to our local Git repository. And now what this is doing over here is taking our remote repository, which this is the link to my remote GitHub repository, and we're adding it as our origin repository, meaning that this repository is going to be where we push and pull our changes. It is going to be the remote source of truth for our code. Run command. All right, so now we are at the point of pushing our code to GitHub. So when we push our code to the remote repository on GitHub, we need to be verified as authorized users with access to write and to read from our remote GitHub project. So when pushing your code to GitHub, there are two main ways to authorizing yourself or your local computer to have access into your GitHub account. I'm going to walk you through both today, and the first is through the GitHub extension that comes with Cursor. The second way is through GitHub personal access tokens, which I'll show you how to do that as well. But for beginners, it's much easier to use the GitHub extension, which I'm going to show you right now. So when we click run command, there should be a pop-up to start the OAuth authentication process of us signing into GitHub and granting Cursor access into our GitHub account. So let's click run command, and here we go. So this pop-up is from Cursor saying the extension GitHub wants to sign in using GitHub. So we're going to click allow. Then we're going to need to copy this code. To finish authenticating, navigate to GitHub and paste in the above one-time code. So copy and continue to GitHub. We are going to need to sign into our GitHub account over here. Click continue, then paste the code, click continue again. And now here is where we authorize Visual Studio Code or Cursor, which Cursor is just a fork of VS Code with our GitHub account. If you want, you could read the details over here. Personal user data. Cursor is going to have access to our public and private repositories. Oh, so before clicking authorize Visual Studio Code, if we go to GitHub, click on your profile picture over here, go to settings. Under settings, go down to integrations and click on applications. Go to the authorized OAuth apps section. Notice over here you have no OAuth apps listed. When we authorize VS Code, we're going to see that VS Code gets listed as an OAuth app right here. Let's go back and click authorize. Need to sign in. Okay, so now we are all set with the Cursor GitHub integration. So let's go back to my GitHub account. Remember, this is the settings, applications, authorized OAuth section. Let's click refresh. And here we have Visual Studio Code listed as an authorized OAuth app with our GitHub account, which means we now have access to push our code to GitHub. Okay, so now we're back in Cursor. When we run this command, we should get a message saying that the push was successful. All right, and now our code has been successfully pushed to GitHub. If we go to our GitHub project and refresh the page, this is our code now that has been committed and pushed from our local repository. So before we get into the deployment, I did want to show you the second way in which we can authorize our local environment to push to our remote GitHub repositories. And that is through GitHub Personal Access Tokens, or PATs. So if you go to your GitHub profile picture over here, click on Settings, scroll down to the Developer Settings section, click on that. Then go down to personal access tokens. So down over here, we have two different kinds of tokens. We have fine grained tokens and tokens classic. So I believe this was the original way of creating tokens, but now according to GitHub's documentation, they do recommend us to use fine grained tokens whenever possible. So today we are going to use a fine grained token, and let's click on generate new token. So we want to use this token for any and all operations regarding pushing and pulling to our remote GitHub repositories, for this one, for all of our past repositories and future repositories. So you can name your token whatever you want, but I'm going to name mine Jeremy Devs Mac Studio GitHub Basic, so I know exactly which computer of mine this token is for, and that this is for GitHub Basic operations. The resource owner is myself. Let's click on expiration and do 90 days. For description, I'm just going to say this token is for basic GitHub operations like pushing and pulling. All right, so now for repository access, we are going to click on all repositories. So we want to be able to use this token for our current repositories and for all future repositories that we create. You can only select repositories over here and manually select which repository that this token has access to, but that's going to take a little bit of extra work. So we're just going to select all repositories. Now under permissions, we have two sections: repository permissions, bunch of permissions over here, and account permissions. If you click on that, bunch more permissions over here. This is why this token is called a fine grained access token, because you can select the permissions at a very granular level for this token. So whatever you select over here in the permissions is going to show over here under the overview. So right now we've selected 0 permissions. So we only need to set 1 permission for our basic GitHub operations. So let's click on our repository permissions, go down to contents. So contents says repository contents, commits, branches, downloads, releases, and merges. We are going to click on the drop down and select read and write. So this is the only permission that we need. And one thing to note is when you select read and write for the content section, scroll down a bit more, metadata says mandatory, it gets selected for you. So under metadata, it says search repositories, list collaborators, and access repository metadata. All right, so we're good. We don't need to touch that. It was updated for us. Scroll all the way down, and under overview, if you click on this, now you can see what we just selected was the contents, access, read and write, and metadata, read-only access. And that is all you need to generate a token. So let's just generate a token over here. And once you leave this screen, you're never going to be able to see your token again. So make sure you copy that and save it in a safe place. Okay. So let's go back to Cursor. Okay, so now we are back here in Cursor, and to kind of reset my credentials within my Cursor IDE, I have deleted my OSX keychain Git credentials, and I also signed out of the Cursor GitHub integration. So just to verify that I'm not authorized to push or pull from GitHub, I'm just going to do git push u origin main, which I don't have any changes to push, but if I run this, I'm going to get denied, and the GitHub extension pop-up is going to show again to try to authorize me in order to push to the remote GitHub repository. So enter, and there you go. There's a pop-up saying, let's go through the authorization process, meaning I'm not authorized to push my local changes to the remote GitHub repo. So I'm going to click cancel over here. And as you can see, my terminal is still in this kind of pending state. So I'm going to click escape, and now it says repository not found. Authentication failed for this is my GitHub remote project. So what we need to do now is to make a small change to our code. Just to add an exclamation point over here, click save. I'm going to say added exclamation mark, and let us first commit these changes. And committing, of course, we're going to have no issue because this is for our local environment. So let's just commit these changes. So now that those changes have been committed to our local repository, we are going to prompt Cursor to help us manually push those changes. And when we push those changes manually, the terminal is going to prompt us to enter our username and our personal access token. And after doing that, then we should be authorized to push to our remote GitHub repository. So for our prompt, we're going to go back over here, drag a source control block. So our prompt over here is going to say, I have already committed my changes to my local Git repo. However, I do not have authentication set up to push my local repo's changes to the remote GitHub repository at, and then include your GitHub repository over here. Then say I've created a GitHub personal access token. Please help me to push my changes and prompt me to enter my username and personal access token manually via the terminal. So hopefully by instructing Cursor to do this, we are not going to get the GitHub extension pop up, and we're going to be able to enter our personal access token, which is going to take the place of your GitHub password. So let us copy this block, go back to cursor, paste our prompt over here, and click submit. All right, so the first command is just to check if our remote repo is properly configured, which it is. So now cursor is initiating the git push command, which then we should be prompted right here in the terminal to enter our username and pat. So run command. Okay, so the GitHub extension is intercepting the request. So I'm going to click cancel. So when we did git push, the GitHub extension popped up, and we do not want to go through that process of authorization. So what we want to do is reprompt cursor. And what that's going to look like is when we did the git push, the cursor GitHub extension pops up to initiate the OAuth process. How can we go around this and enter our username Pat in the terminal? So this is what we want to say to cursor. Let's go ahead and click submit. So if we're trying to do this without cursor agent, I'm pretty sure I can just pull up the terminal outside of cursor and run the git push command. And then right then and there, it's going to prompt me for the username and pat. Hopefully that is what cursor is going to suggest. But let's see. All right, so cursor replied, I understand we need to bypass the cursor GitHub extension and force Git to use terminal-based authentication. We can do this by setting git terminal prompt equals 1 environment variable and explicitly setting the credential helper to use the terminal. All right, cool. So I had no idea about this command, but sounds like it's going to work. So let's click run command. GitHub, the extension is still getting in there. The extension is still getting in there. So cancel, try that command, and the extension still pops up. Any other ideas? Should I open my Mac terminal separately and try this outside of the IDE? So I think that might work because we're no longer going to be attached to the IDE if we open up the built-in Mac terminal. So that would be my guess, but let's see one more time what the agent suggests. All right, so cursor agrees with my suggestion. So we're going to open up our Mac terminal application. We're going to navigate to our directory and we're going to run the push command. By running the push command there, we're no longer attached to cursor, and it should prompt us within the terminal to enter our username and personal access token. So if you do command spacebar and type in terminal, so this is our Mac terminal. If we do CD, this CD means you're going to go to this directory, which is in my dev folder, my first React app, enter. So now we are in our project folder. And if you want to just verify the path to where this is, if you do pwd, it'll check the path on your computer, which you can see for me is users Jeremy.Rojas, dev, my first React app. So we are in our my first React app folder, meaning you can see all the files by doing an ls. I like to do ls minus ltr, kind of show the permissions, the date at which things were modified, and you can see the different files over here, which are in white, and the folders are in blue. So if you want to go into a folder, this is just kind of a quick terminal basic lesson. You can do cd source to go into the source folder. You want to see what's in the source folder, do ls, and you can see what's in there. If you want to go back to the main folder, go back to cd and put ... Now you are back in our main my first React app folder, which is where we're going to do the git push origin main. So I'll go back to cursor, copy this command, let us click here, and we're going to click enter. All right, perfect. So now it's asking us for our GitHub username. So I'm going to put Jeremy Rojas, which is my username, enter. And now, so it's asking for your GitHub password. So do not enter your GitHub password. This is where we're going to enter our personal access token. So I hope you saved your pat somewhere. Go ahead and copy it. I've just copied mine, so I'm going to do Command V. And when you do Command V, or when you do right click paste, you're not going to see anything there because it's hidden. So we're just going to trust that it's there and click enter. All right, and as you can see over here, our push was successful. Our local main branch was pushed to the remote main branch over there. You can see over here source control was updated with the push as well. So just to verify one more time that you can push now with your personal access token, let's go back to app.tsx, remove the exclamation point, click save. We're going to select this, and to do a commit and push all in one, you can actually just click this, drop down over here and click commit and push. So clicking commit and push. So the commit failed because I didn't add a commit message. I forgot about that. So add removing exclamation point. Now we can select the file again and do a commit and push. So that should do it. All right, so that commit and push went through. No errors occurred. You can go over here to your terminal and do a git status. Git status on branch main. Your branch is up to date with our origin main branch, which is your remote branch in GitHub. Nothing to commit, working tree clean. That is how to set up your personal access token with Cursor in order to push to your remote GitHub repository. So now I've showed you two different ways to authenticate your local environment with a remote GitHub repository. Now let's get to the last part of our tutorial, deploying our application to Vercel. So far we've installed Cursor, we've developed our application, and we've pushed our application's code to GitHub. Now we want to deploy our application so that it can be live on the internet. Vercel is one of the most popular options to deploy web applications. It makes it really easy, and once you connect your GitHub project to Vercel and deploy your application on Vercel, any future changes that you push to your GitHub project automatically get deployed to your live site. And that is called automatic deployment. When you push your update or your new feature to your main branch on GitHub, Vercel sees those changes and automatically deploys those changes to your live website. So since I already have an active account, I'm not going to walk you through creating a new account in Vercel. So please go ahead and do that. Once you've created your account, you do have to create a team, which is kind of like a workspace for different projects. So once you create a team, go to the homepage of your team. It should be at vercel.com/ the name of your team right here. And if you go into the top right-hand corner, there should be a button called Add New. We're going to click that and click Project. So now this is where you connect your GitHub account and pull in any projects that you want to deploy. So your screen might look a little bit different if you have not already connected your project to GitHub. In order to do that, I believe you just click on this drop down over here and you can click Add a GitHub account. So when you do this, you might get a pop-up from GitHub saying authorize Vercel to have access to your GitHub account, which then you just confirm the access. And after that, Vercel is now going to have access to your GitHub account. So in this section over here, you may or may not have some repositories already listed. If you do see your repository that you've created, you can go ahead and click import. But if you do not see it, you might have to click over here, adjust GitHub app permissions. So click that. Over here, you might have to sign in. So once you sign in, this is actually your GitHub account. And as you can see, you are in the settings page. This is the applications integration. And as you can see, Vercel is one of your integrated applications to your GitHub account. So if you scroll down past permissions over here, now there's a section called repository access. So you can either choose all repositories, which will give Vercel access to all your repositories, or you can click only select repositories, which you can hand pick each of the repositories that you want Vercel to have access to, which as you can see, this is the option that I have. Because I don't want Vercel to have access to all my repositories, I manually add each repository that I want Vercel to have access to. So this is the application that we've been working on. I'm going to click that. Now it's added to my selected repositories, so just click save. So after clicking save, this window should close. I'm just going to hit X. Now my first React app has been added to this little window, which we can do import. So now this is the new project creation window for Vercel. Project name, my first React app. We're actually going to change this to just tip it. Framework preset is Vite. That's what we use to build our application. In the future, when you start using APIs and start connecting to databases, this is where you're going to list your environment variables, but we don't have any today. So we're just going to go ahead and click deploy. So that took probably just under 10 seconds to deploy. Congratulations, you just deployed a new project to Jeremy Devs. So now we're going to get a dashboard. So now this is our page just for our application. You can see this is my team, this is my project, and now you have build logs, you have runtime logs, and now we can click on our domain to view our application. So justtipit.vercel.app is my application. So this application is live, everybody. You can go to this application and use this tip calculator when you're at your bar, when you're at your restaurant, and you need to calculate a tip in a pinch. So cool. That took no time at all. Deployment can seem like a very intimidating thing, but luckily Vercel and GitHub make it very easy to deploy your applications and get them live and ready for action. So if you want to add a custom domain like justtipit.com, you can do that if you go to settings, go to domains, and over here, so here's where you can add your custom domain. First, you have to go and purchase the domain. I like to use pork bun for my domains. So after you've purchased your domain, you just go over here, add the domain, and then fill out a few fields. So again, adding a custom domain is very straightforward with Vercel. So now that we have our application deployed, I do want to show you how we can make a change, push that change to GitHub, and see the automatic deployment happen in Vercel. So our application over here is still running on our local host. We're going to keep it on this side, and I'm going to put cursor on this side. So we're going to make a very small change. You can search where just tip it is in the application code. So it's in our app.tsx. We're going to make this change, just tip it, good. So this is going to be our code change. Let's click Command S to save. You can see it instantly updated over here in our application. So very small change to our title, but this is just to demonstrate the flow of pushing to GitHub. I was over here in the search bar. Let's go over to our source control. So as you can see now, Git, our source control, recognized that we have some changes to our application. So if you double click on this file, what we see now is a diff, which shows you the difference in what our local machine has and with what GitHub has in the cloud. So as you can see, this is what GitHub has in the cloud. Red means this is the old version. Green means this is the new version coming in with the new changes. So now we want to commit and push this into GitHub. If you look down here, source control graph, this is going to be a running list of all of your commits. This was the initial commit that we did earlier in the video. If you double click on that, this lists all the files that we committed. So you can see we have a README here, some JS files, package lock. There's a lot of files here. It lists each file and all the changes that we committed. See, there's our index CSS and SVG. Exit this over here. So before you actually commit the code, you have to write a message. And in the message, usually it's a good practice to be pretty descriptive of what you are committing. So in our case, we're going to say changed header title. So remember the difference between committing and pushing. Commit will push these changes to your local machine, but we also want to push the changes to GitHub so that it can get deployed to Vercel. So what I like to do is just select the changes over here, go into this drop down and click commit and push. So let's do that. So clicking commit and push will commit your changes and automatically push your changes to GitHub as well. So as you can see down here, this was the commit that we just did. Yep, those are our changes. Now let's go over to GitHub and click refresh. As you can see over here, this was the commit message that I just entered, changed header title. So you can click over here and see all the commits, 2 commits. This should show our initial commit and our changed header title. So far, these are the only commits that have happened in our project, which as you can see down here, it's the same as in the source control graph. So once we push our code to the main branch in GitHub, remember, we do have automatic deployments with Vercel. So if we go back to Vercel, go back to our project, as you can see over here, it already deployed our changes. So usually if the deployment takes a while, if you have a lot of changes or if you have a big project, so the status won't say ready, it'll have like a status to indicate that a deployment is happening. You can also go to the deployments tab and you can see over here 2 minutes ago our changed header title push from GitHub was deployed and it took only 10 seconds to deploy. So now if we go back to our application and click refresh, and there you have our changes live on your web app. So there you have it, everybody. Today we installed Cursor from scratch. We built your first React app. We pushed our code to GitHub and we deployed our app using Vercel, and the app is now live on the internet. So I'd say that's a pretty solid start to your development journey with Cursor. There are so many more concepts to get into, but we'll have to save those concepts for future videos. If you have any questions about anything we've covered in this video, or if you get stuck at any point within this process, let me know in the comments down below. Also, let me know if there are any other specific topics that you want me to cover. I'm going to be doing a lot of content on Cursor this year. This is my AI coding tool of choice, and that is all I have for today. I really hope that you enjoyed the video. Hit that like button if you did. Subscribe for more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.